Oh, was that one?
Logan Cunningham wants to give us some advice on how to. He wants to have a meeting. It's culture. He wants to have a meeting with us. And,
Oh, Logan does?
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought we suggested that. But we
Really?
never quite made it happen. But it
And
sure sounds
his vast experience.
Vast experience.
good. Years.
My understanding was the reason he only taught 2 years was because he couldn't pass the debt. That was what I was told. I've never checked.
I would like to check that.
That would be very interesting.
Hey, everyone, I can hear you and it's being live streamed right now on YouTube.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
Much better. Still a bit fatigued, but over it. I'd say.
Get to be my age and then you'll get used to that fatigue.
Thank you.
I can't see the room though. So I don't know who's in person and who's. I hear voices, but I can't see. Hold on, now I see ya.
Got rosy cheeks.
Yeah, we had the whole family that must be eating something that was not too good. We were all fighting. Two bathrooms. Like, oh, man. So yeah, I decided to blow off.
Yeah,
So I told,
probably a good choice.
and I told Kathy, nobody wants to see the face of me. Because I rushed to the bathroom.
Yeah.
But yeah, today we all seem to be okay. Because we went to Vito's and got bacon cheeseburgers.
It was Vito's, you think?
No.
Oh, you went there today? Thank goodness.
We all ate salad from Publix.
Oh.
I think I'm gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 4:01 and I'm not sure who exactly is the designee for running the meeting, but if you want me to take it, I'll take it. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna call this meeting. This is a joint meeting of the Bluffton Growth Committee and the North of the Broad Committee. Today is May 26th. It is a little bit after 4 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. The first item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everybody. Next item is the approval of the agenda.
Well, Campbell, so moved.
Do I have a second?
Yep, second.
Thank you, Ms. Fidrich. Earl Campbell moved to approve the agenda. Ms. Tricia Fidrich seconded. Any comments or discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I believe that was unanimous. The next item is public comments. Ms. Cushionberry or Molly, do we have any comments?
No comments.
None? Okay, perfect.
Someone who was apt and Tina Watts, so those two are absent.
Okay, thank you. Next item is discussion on planning for future needs. And there is a presentation that is in board docs, and I'm going to, I think, kick this over to Mr. Robert Otting and Ms. Carol Crutchfield for the presentation, but please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
You're correct.
Awesome. Robin, if you could bring that up on the screen whenever you get a moment, and we'll just jump right into it.
Everything is going on.
Everything is going on.
Yeah, I just lost everything.
Oh, because you're charging. Yeah. There was an extra little one, Robin, that looked like it might. So put it down. Yeah, just put it down.
You plug it directly into that wall outlet over there behind your chair.
Rachel, can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Make it full screen, because I think you're gonna cut some stuff off. I may have to just scroll a little bit.
Far left, 3 bars.
Yeah, let's see, now get it down to 100 or less. Right in the middle. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Yeah,
All
now,
right.
yay, okay. So the first question is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is it just extra capacity in Northern Beaufort County? Is it also not enough capacity in Southern Beaufort County? Is it equity in our classrooms and instructional spaces inside our building? We think it's all three. So let's start. Go ahead, next one. Let's start this conversation by looking at the age of our buildings, which will begin to address the item on the previous slide, equity in instructional spaces. 8 were built prior to 1980. Most of them in the Beaufort cluster, except for the 2 elementary schools on Hilton Head. I've colored all of these in pink. You'll see why later. We know that our older buildings tend to have smaller classrooms, few if any small instructional spaces for speech, ESL, resource teachers. They have less storage, less office spaces for today's needs. You all know that most of these buildings have had some major renovations at some point in time, but some of these renovations may still be over 20 years old. Our current facility condition assessment will tell us more detail about the building's conditions and needs for renovation or replacement. But we do know that in addition to major mechanical systems, the building assets like windows, doors, floors, casework, if they've not been renovated, are beyond their expected life. Next one. The next group of 14 school buildings were built between 1980 and 1999. 6 of these were assessed in 2019 as part of the Community Project Review Committee's work prior to the referendum. The 19 referendum funded a replacement school for Robert Smalls, major renovations for Beaufort Elementary that were just completed, major renovations for Battery Creek High School, which are underway, and Hilton Head Middle School, whose renovations are designed and construction beginning now. The designs for renovations to Hilton Head High were also included in the 19 referendum, with hopes to have a shovel-ready project for a phase 2 referendum in 2023. Also, Ladies Island Middle is identified as a project for Phase 2 referendum in 2023. This next slide, you'll see 15 school buildings that were built between 2000 and today, with the average age of 15 years. But those built in the 2000 and 2001 range are showing the issues of a 20-year-old school. So when we talk about right-sizing a building, it's not just about addressing capacity of the school in terms of extra space, but also about creating learning environments that support today's instructional models, space for collaborative learning styles. Older schools with smaller classrooms are not always flexible enough, even with lower student-teacher ratios, to meet those needs as easily as those schools built in the last 15 years. And this is part of the equity issue that needs addressing district-wide. So let's start talking about Southern Beaufort County. Next. So the Ad Hoc Bluffton Growth Committee was formed around March 2020, just as the pandemic struck. They developed this scope of work that you see on the screen. The committee has spent the past few years researching growth in Bluffton by reviewing enrollment and projection data, completing site visits at each school and conversations with principals, reviewing renovations and additions at the Bluffton schools completed after their initial openings. They discussed impact fees. They heard several presentations from the Town of Bluffton Growth Department and Beaufort County Treasurer's Office about growth in property accounts during and after COVID-19. And they reviewed the list of projects outlined on the 2022 Facilities Master Plan. Next one. So in order to understand the issues Bluffton is experiencing, the committee has engaged stakeholders by surveying realtor groups and providing capital improvement plan books to elected officials. They discussed available land, both owned by the district and available for purchase. They met with the Town of Bluffton to discuss growth multiple times. They examined the use of mobiles, attendance zones by grade, to discuss the effects of COVID-19 on the 2020-2021 enrollment and the implications for projections and future enrollments. Next one. When COVID restrictions were lifted, the committee made site visits to the schools to examine enrollment and projections, building and program capacity, discuss needs with the principals and staff. They also examined past renovations and additions to add a capacity to the school and examined available space on campuses by viewing aerial imagery over the past 15 to 20 years. This one. The committee was involved with discussions on school impact fees and the need for them to fund additional capacity for Bluffton. And the committee continued to engage stakeholders and public officials to understand growth and how COVID-19 had affected residential building in this area. Next one. The committee engaged Maria Walls, the Beaufort County Treasurer, to look at growth in the county through increases in tax accounts countywide, not Bluffton. They discussed land acquisition with a land consultant. They've reviewed 45-day counts for 21-22 school year in comparison to the previous 2 years to again examine the effects of COVID on growth in Bluffton, and had discussions with the Town of Bluffton and Beaufort County on growth in Bluffton and in other areas. The next slide is just a quick review on the enrollment data. You've seen it, it's in the master plan. Bluffton is the only cluster that saw a drop in enrollment due to COVID and then return to an increasing enrollment trend line. So the 19 projected enrollment, which is the green line that you see, anticipated us running out of all capacity in 2021. That was where we were. 2021 projections, which are the blue line, crosses over the red line, which is our total capacity in 2025, which allowed us some breathing room to get the necessary planning in place to address capacity needs. However, if we look at the needed capacity line, we need additional space in 2022. So now is the time to address the capacity issues that have been outlined in our facilities master plan. Next slide is just a reminder, and you can find this in your facilities master plan book on page 35. These are capacity triggers that we always talk about. Target levels in that 75 to 89% range, and 90 to 100, no additional students. When we get to overcapacity, we should be implementing a plan for changes in student enrollment. The next slide, if we look at the age of the schools in the southern clusters, we find that most of the older buildings in southern Beaufort County are in the Hilton Head cluster, whose average age is 34 years. Hilton Head's issue really isn't about needing extra capacity, but bringing instructional spaces to an equitable level with larger classrooms and additional instructional spaces, which have been defined as needed by our instructional services department. Which brings us back to that discussion about right-sizing buildings. Bluffton cluster has newer buildings since the growth did not really begin there until the late 1990s. Average age of buildings is 16 years. Bluffton's issue is needing extra space and capacity, enough space for interventionists and professional development. So the equity part of the equation here is having to have larger student-teacher ratios to accommodate the number of students in the building, and having to have teachers and students in portables and modular buildings meant for a temporary solution. Next slide. So these are the items that are listed in our facilities master plan that address additional student capacity projects. Most of these are in the Bluffton cluster. Now let's talk about Northern Beaufort County. So the Northern Beaufort Ad Hoc Committee was formed less than a year ago, and they developed this scope of work. They visited all the schools, plus adult education and right choices. They discussed programs in schools with the principals. They saw how the schools were utilizing the space they had. They discussed academic needs, reviewed enrollments, and projected enrollments. They met with the county and the town of Port Royal planning staffs to discuss future growth, and they reviewed the facilities master plan document. This committee started out by making visits to all the schools in Northern Beaufort County, as well as adult ed and right choices. At these site visits, the committee looked at the enrollment projections, building and program capacities, and discussed needs with principals and staff. Thanks. Yeah. This committee has completed site visits, reviewing enrollments and projections, building and program capacities, reviewed additions to buildings via aerial imagery over the past 15 years, reviewed this year's 45-day enrollments and current projections, had those conversations with planners from Beaufort County and the town of Port Royal, and discussed the facilities master plan. And again, just a data recap for enrollments, projections, and capacity in Northern Beaufort County. Again, this is all of Northern Beaufort County grouped together on this one. Prior to the pandemic, northern clusters were trending on a slow decline. We saw the drop in enrollment in 2020 due to COVID, which continued a slow decline for projections from 2020 and 2021. The red line, which shows your overall capacity, we have available space, but our concern here is about what type of space for instruction that meets current trends for collaborative learning and flexible spaces. Looking at the age of buildings in Northern Beaufort County, the average age for all buildings is 41 years. You see that most of the older buildings are in the Beaufort cluster, shown in pink. Beaufort cluster average age is 49 years. Battery Creek average age is 40 years. Well Branch average age is 22 years. As we've discussed, those older facilities have the smaller classrooms and less available space for storage, collaborative instruction, small group instruction like resource, ESL, and flexibility. So from our facilities master plan, you'll see that we have some things that address facility modernization projects. We have the replacement school for Ladies Island Middle, and we have renovation and replacement for Hilton Head Island High School. So why do we ask for a joint ad hoc committee? In June of 2021, Dr. Rodriguez June of 2021, Dr. Rodriguez presented you with a plan for a process to address district enrollment in Northern Beaufort County. So if you look at the next slide, these two ad hoc committees started at different points in time. But you can see from this timeline, you have completed many of the same tasks to bring both of you to this point in time. When you align this with the process that Dr. Rodriguez outlined in June 2021, we're at the point of taking the findings to the community. So we think this is the appropriate next step for both committees. Back to the timeline. You've completed the first 3 steps. Formed ad hoc committees, you've defined your scope of work, and you've done your research on enrollment and many other things. So we believe the next step is community engagement. Hear what the public thinks. Then you all would regroup and identify your next action steps, and then take those next action steps back to the community. So this is what we think the next slide, the next step for community input should look like. So surveys is an option. Having some facilitated conversations across the district, share what you all have found. Review the facilities master plan where we've outlined those big ideas. And then hear what people have to say about what they want in the community. And then as committees, you all need to decide how you want to collect this community input. And district staff is here to support you in those efforts. Next one, looking back at the timeline, we're gonna keep going back to that. So we'd like to start now. And I know summer can be interesting, but we think we should start. And spend the next 6 to 7 months going through these last steps to develop priorities that you all as a board have for the Community Project Review Committee 2.0. So everything about this committee will be decided by you as a board. Note that this timeline is based on a potential board decision to proceed with a referendum in November 2023. There are several ways this committee could be formed and what their scope of work could be. But let's talk about the last one and why it was successful. So the last community committee was tasked with helping the board solve complex facility-related issues and make recommendations for major renovations, replacement schools, etc. The committee had district-wide representation for reviewing projects and had a well-defined scope of work. I thought this was a great committee who understood their task, examined the issues, looked at schools outside their original scope as they saw needs not originally presented to them. They understood the depth of issues and made bold recommendations for $629 million worth of needed capital projects that the board put forth to the vote and resulted in a $344 million bond referendum in 2019. So what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Carol. I can't see if anybody has their hand raised. Are there any hands raised in the room?
Trisha does.
Trisha, thank you.
Carol, not surprisingly, you and your team have laid this out beautifully. Well done. I do have a couple of questions, and let's start at the end and go forward, go backwards. So on slide 25, community input, spend time from now until the end of the school year. Are you really thinking the end of the end of the calendar year? So
That's, yes,
calendar
probably
year.
a correct statement. Yes.
Okay, so the end of the calendar year, which lines up better than with your idea of then spend, getting the community group together. Okay, And the other question I have is, when you go back to the age of the schools, and I know we discussed this, I think, at our last meeting, and making sure that we are putting out, the information that, that the community already knows about. Like when I look at the slide 3, and I see Beaufort Middle School, and I mentioned this before. It's listed that Beaufort Middle is, okay, let me find it right here now. I'm sorry, it's on slide 2. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert. 1959. I mean, if you're going to talk about a major renovation, that was taken down to the bare bones. There were just half walls standing. It was the floor, correct? And just the walls. So when we talk about that, plays into your age, the average age of the buildings north of the Broad. Is that really, what we want to convey to the public, that Beaufort Middle School was 1959, when in 2000, right? What's that, 41 years later, it had a total rehaul. So
I'd say it's a very good point, and that's the whole purpose of the facilities condition assessment that will give us an overall look of every building. But realize when you say that 2000, now that's over 20 years old, those renovations in themselves. So yes, and that's why we're saying in almost all these buildings listed here that are pre-1980 have had major renovations of one kind or another, or they've had partial renovations multiple times. So
Right.
I don't think there's any building of this era that, is original for the most part. They've all been converted. Now, Beaufort Middle was completely redone.
yeah, I just want to make sure that, because I think this is fabulous. And that when we do go out to the community, and you're going to have people there that say, well, there was a major renovation in the year 2000. That was 22 years ago, which puts them, which just takes your average age.
Would take that.
It would, and I just,
But the
But
point
we didn't feel
here,
like we needed to move it to that other category where it was new or built to that other age.
I mean, the
Yes.
frame of Beaufort Middle is still the frame, that was from 1959. Now, I'd say Beaufort Middle, the district office even, we had this conversation, they have good bones, so they're not too outdated when you update them. There are other, the problem is though, that classroom size is still probably smaller than the normal classroom size. Those office spaces are way smaller and more compact than a modern building.
okay.
So even though it was renovated in 2000,
Mhm.
it's not the equivalent of a 2000 building. I mean, if you look at Beaufort Middle compared to Beaufort High, which is about 2000, you look at those offices, I mean, they are high school and middle school. So it is hard to make that comparison. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, I just want to make
We
sure.
don't have a lot, again, those little small instructional spaces.
Yeah.
There's other things that we really need and use now in those older buildings, even though we renovated them or we, did a bump out. Those bump out, we saw a lot of those in Mossy Oaks and Broad River and some of those. Yes, square footage wise, it's the same, but it's not the same space as what you would see at Pritchardville or River Ridge. Not at all.
And I hear what you guys are saying, and you guys look at it from that expert point of view. I'm looking at it as a community member, and I just would want to say that, oh, hey, you know what? This was like a major renovation, and I think there are Shell Point, Riverview Charter School, major renovation. So I just want to make sure that the next step is to go to the community, that it's, I don't know if it's just an asterisk to, or to have, maybe have the criteria through which you guys are looking at it through different eyes than I am. And maybe it's crucial to say, okay, what is some of the criteria that was used where even though it had a major remod and opened up in the year 2000, like Beaufort High or 2001, it still doesn't have the equity. I mean, I'm just.
And I think Riverview is a great example of that. I mean, Riverview has really small classrooms. So we redid the floors, we redid the ceilings, we redid the lights, and that was probably in 2000. It was after 2010. So
Right, they didn't open
it's
everything.
been more recent than that. And so, but it's still not the same building as a building built in 2010.
Got it.
And I think that's When we get to the facilities condition assessment, that'll give us more insight into those kind of specifics. And Beaufort Middle's a prime example of that. That building, even you could keep that going today. You may not have small resource rooms, but you could turn a classroom into multiple resource rooms. So that building is still a pretty modern building. Where some of the other ones that are aged have some very different configurations and classroom sizes and shapes and layouts from a modern building. That's the point we're trying to make there. Even if you renovated them today to be brand new, it's still not the same. And that, you know, I'm gonna say this, we've been hearing from the residents in Northern Beaufort County that have and we've invested a lot in those buildings, but they're still, and they keep saying, but that's not the same as what you have in Southern Beaufort County. And all of a sudden, you know, you're right. It's not. We can give you new ceilings, new floors, new everything. That building is not the same. An old building with new ceilings, new floors, new air conditioning is not the same as what we built today.
Yeah, and I think we have to look at how, when we do take it back out to the community, how we talk about those buildings. You know, we might not give them this list. They can see it now, but that may not be how you start your conversation. I think that's what you all have to kind of decide. What is it that you want to share with them about what you all looked at, how you looked at it? You know, maybe we need to do some of that same kind of thing with them, the community, so they see it through with the eyes that you did. I don't know. Yeah.
So that building was built before 1959. Yes, that used to be Beaufort High School.
I think that's just what's on the plaque inside the building, so.
Would it be beneficial, you think, if we had the relative square footage of kind of what's the industry standard of an elementary school classroom or a middle school classroom, high school classroom, and we kind of did a comparative of, you know, the buildings north of the Broad, their elementary schools are about here on average size, and what the state kind of the standard is for a classroom of that size? Because I know we're talking about the bones of it might have been from 1959 and everything else is somewhat newer. But I think when we're talking about classroom sizes and physical spaces, it might be beneficial to convey that to the public of this is the right size of what a classroom should be like. I don't know, Carol, if we have something like that, or we might want to consider adding it, but just a suggestion. I don't know.
We certainly can look at that.
To me, what would express that the best would be square foot per student.
Oh,
When you
yeah.
start looking at what we're saying the capacity of that building is, what's that square foot for each student?
per class.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And again, I think part of it is how they're arranged, because like I said, those that had those renovation bump outs, square footage wise, they're probably the same as a Pritchardville or River Ridge. But that usable space is not the same at all. You know, if you're the classroom teacher in that space, you're gonna have to teach differently because you have 2 columns in the middle of your classroom. So
Right.
It limits you. Yes.
And when you're talking capacity, you know, we always have this thing, it's in program capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we've come to discover is much more important.
Trying to move
And
towards that.
somehow I figure the small classrooms really play into that program capacity. So I think we have to emphasize that.
Ms. Boatright?
Thanks. I think this is a fascinating discussion, and it, you know, brings up a whole lot of how you compare apples and oranges and what, you know, trying to determine what people need. And then to Tricia's point, what people expect out of their schools might be different than what they need out of their schools and vice versa. So I hate to be like just this kind of boring question, but you mentioned June 21st that Frank Rodriguez presented a plan for the North of Broad to the Board of Education. And I was trying to remember, so I went into board docs to see what that presentation was, and then we didn't have any meeting. Can you give me a little more details on that? Because I don't remember, sadly. I might have missed it, what exactly that presentation was.
You pretty much outlined that timeline that I put on there.
Do you remember when that was? Does anyone else there remember? Because I couldn't, we didn't have a board meeting anywhere near June 21st.
I think it was a work session.
We didn't have a work session anywhere near June, at least according to board docs. My memory's not great, and I'm not one of those, really organized people. Trish is probably over there like pulling out her day planner.
Yeah, I didn't bring, I do remember I made the motion and I
You
asked,
made the motion, yep.
asked Frank for a process by which to address.
And I just wanted to see the presentation to kind of jog my memory, because I didn't remember that really pretty, color coded slide. And I was like, oh, let me see what that was all about. I can't find anything anywhere near that. So
So there is
It was
not,
more of a linear
it was a discussion.
bullet point discussion. I made the pretty timeline.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She took his words and picture.
Yes.
okay, do you know where those words might be? Does anyone else remember? I probably was gone. It was summer. I might have been traveling.
I'm just gonna look it up.
We thought we had checked that, so
You might have. Look, I have been all day long, like making really dumb mistakes. I'm blaming it on all kinds of things.
I can remember the timeline was vertical.
Yeah.
And it had like a blue line
Yeah,
Vertical.
it absolutely was.
with a few words on it. And it might have been two pages, or it was just one. It was not a large presentation. It was just a.
Right.
Okay.
More of a handout than an actual PowerPoint
Okay.
presentation.
We'll
Is what I-
All right.
definitely,
Well, maybe I'm not remembering because I just was trying to jog my memory because it didn't ring any bells, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," and then I couldn't find anything, so I figured it was somewhere in the summer of last year. If anyone finds it, they can just shout it out.
This is the timeline now, right? The timeline that you put up on the slide is
It's the same timeline he had outlined. Yes.
regardless. I don't care what happened in history.
Yeah.
Right now, that's our timeline.
Yes.
Okay.
Colonel Guyer?
Thank you. When we were marketing the first referendum, I got pulled into a group from Hilton Head that wanted to say, you're all screwed up in this referendum because you should be right-sizing north of the Broad, closing down excess schools so that you would save the money, operational funds and so on. And so you're completely wrong in your priorities in this referendum. And I explained, I said, well, it's better to have overcapacity in the short run than undercapacity. And that's why we had to build the additions in May River and River Ridge. And then there was, Robert Smalls, this is what they were looking at, is they were looking at our capacity figures. And we tried to explain program capacity versus actual capacity and gone into that. And I thought that was, pretty much answered, but now I'm getting the same thing again, this time from people north of the Broad. And here's what I heard just last week from two different schools saying that their SICs have heard the rumor that one of either Broad River or Shanklin is going to be closed down and going to be because of Robert Small's great capacity to move into that. And so now again, we have capacity. And that seems to be the thing that, and I explained to them by taking my handy dandy book to say it won't fit. When you have multiple schools at 71% capacity, you can't move them together without having 140 capacity percent in another school, in the one combined school. So when we market this, I really hope we focus on the capacity. And when I talked about impact fees, I did the math from here for the 5-year projections and found that north of the Broad, that the enrollment is projected to decrease by over 600 students. I found that the capacity at Hilton Head Island by itself is going to be reduced by over 600 students. And yet the requirements in the Hardyville, Bluffton, Okatee is about almost 1,400 additional students. So that makes, that I can explain to the average taxpayer that, look, we do have to right size. I don't know how we're going to do that, but we're going to have to right size north of the Broad, but and maybe even Hilton Head. But we definitely have to focus on kids in classrooms south of the Broad in the Okatee, Hardyville, Bluffton area. And we're going to be, and your projection shows it, we don't even have room for mobiles to handle that. So when we package this, that's why to me it's so important that we not only get the engineering and permitting work accomplished on Hilton Head High School, like we said we would do in the referendum, but we also make a decision pretty darn quick of where we're going to build, what type of schools in Bluffton, and get that in the design phase right away. Like next spring at the latest, if we're gonna be ready to go for 2023, we need to have hard figures, and we need to address capacity, because that's what they look at. Unfortunately, they don't look at sizes of classrooms and all that. They're macro view, and they're looking at capacity. So that's my editorial comment. Thank you.
Dr. Glatz?
Thank you, Carol and staff I think the presentation is really good. I think the points that have already been made have been really good. I think to address Tricia's, the taxpayers have funded a lot of renovations, and I think you've got to include maybe the major ones on this slide. You don't probably have to include every little last one, but major renovations, because otherwise it's like they're not getting credit for it. And I agree with Colonel Geyer too. I think people will primarily look at capacity. They're not going to be saying, oh, the room's 14 by 10 versus 14 by 9, or that's just too, they're going to, like you said, the macro view. They're not going to go down into the little microscopic differences between an elementary and middle, high school classrooms, et cetera. But I do think we need to give credit for especially a major renovation. Or otherwise it looks like, otherwise it looks like either we weren't grateful about it, or we're ignorant about it, or,
Or we're trying to make it look a certain way.
Yes, exactly.
When it is the true story, but there are some, mitigating factors with it.
That's it.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes, something Colonel Guy said about Robert Smalls. That discussion came up when they were talking about building new Robert Smalls, and people are still talking about that now, saying that they should close Shanklin and Broad River. Yes, go ahead.
Just one thing on Robert Smalls, please, everybody, let people know the new Robert Smalls is smaller capacity wise. The Robert Smalls of today can handle more students than the one we're building. Yeah. Now the building is actually, again, this is your point. The building is actually bigger in square footage, but the way it is laid out has fewer classrooms. And so it is actually built for fewer students. That's just been that's been a trend in education from the 60s on up. It's just that spaces are growing and you need more breakout space. In the 1960s, you didn't have English as a second language and things of that as much as we have today. And counseling services, which are going to be needed in the future. So I just want to make that point on the Robert Smalls. Please tell them the one we're building is for fewer students. So
Tricia, she brought up a good point about talking about remodeling, because some folks are saying, why remodel? Why don't you tear down and build a new school? And that is some of the things that are going to probably come up for the next referendum. There's also been discussion talking about everything goes south of the Broad. That also people can talk about that also.
That's why it's real important that we put up there the 2019 referendum and where the dollars were spent, because more have been spent north of the Broad.
Right,
You
that's
know,
true.
people need to be educated.
Yeah.
You know, that's just misinformation.
Yes, it is.
I was gonna ask, what is the date that, remind me, what is the date the facilities assessment will be completed by?
Our plan is to present, I think we're gonna bring to the next operations
Yes, on the
meeting,
31st.
not the full, but a sample, just to get the comments before we finalize the book.
Yes.
So we'll start the discussion on, at the next operations committee with, because they started out a pilot run on the Hilton Head campus, so we'll show the results of
Pilot
that.
plus one school,
Oh, what is
plus
that?
one on this side, yes.
Okay.
That's what we're gonna show at operations committee.
Is that the 31st or the one on the 8th?
The one on the 8th.
The one on the 8th is the 31st was just for the.
Right, I'm
8%
sorry, you're correct.
priority.
It's the one on the 8th, yes.
Okay.
And well as William Smith.
Sorry, just one more question. The project list from the 2019 referendum that was done by the community committee, the list that was like the original 600 and something thousand. Comparing that to our facilities master plan and the projects that are listed here in this presentation, is there a way to identify, you know, from those two lists, what is carryover and what is possible new? I think it would be important to kind of continue that work and show this is what was assessed back in 2019 by our community committee. These are the things that we still believe are a need. I wonder if there's a way to maybe identify that or demark those so that people, when we're going back out there and talking to them, say, listen, we knew back in 2019 that these were needs and we're just bringing it forward still. Mr. Smith?
A little different switch. In terms of community engagement, I'm concerned that the summertime is not really one of the best time to get people, parents, in the community engaged, because people take trips, people are gone. I think it's more upon just surveys that need to be more extensive, and also need to be in advance in a time so that people can make time to get involved and to plan to attend these things as well. Now that I'm concerned about in terms of how we move forward with that. There's too many times where, sometimes it's not really, parents are not really engaged. If you look, most parent PTOs and all those stuff, they're not active because of that. And most people stop at the end of the school year because the parents and the community members are off on vacations and different things of that nature. Some people are even out of the country. Thank you.
One comment in regard to the surveys and sending those out, just something that I think that might be beneficial, just besides sending it out to the parents. I think as we've done with the work in the Bluffton committee and at the North of the Broad committee, engaging those surveys with our realtors and engaging those surveys with our other elected officials and asking them as well, getting full stakeholder input. I don't know if that was part of what you guys already intended, but I think outside of the parent box, we also need to ask those other stakeholder groups.
David's hand was up.
David?
I was just going to mention the same point that you made about the 2019 stuff. That's where we start. This is all the stuff we couldn't do in 2019. That's the beginning.
And I believe everything in 2019 is in the facilities master plan. That statement's correct.
I think so.
So what we can do is highlight those to make sure they
If we
pop
left
out.
something out, we listen over.
Give it a gold star or something,
Be the
or a
silver star.
senior citizens notation.
Agreed.
community engagement, we do have a new tool with our new website that has multiple ways to engage right from the front page. So that may be another possibility we could explore as to what could, the survey could go on there. That way, anybody looking at our website would be able to engage with that, not just parents, to your point.
There any other hands raised? Didn't see them. Okay, so Carol, what would you like from us as a joint committee for next steps? Bringing forward, obviously, a report to the full board, but is there any specific action that you are looking for from the committee to the full board? Oops, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Well, I mean, for the most part, what we were, we think now the community engagement piece is start talking about that as far as the two, North of Broad and South of Broad, whether you want to do it together or separate. Are y'all ready to go out to the community and present your findings and get there and ask for feedback? Or that's kind of what we see as the next stage, and that kind of needs to fall back on. Now we can assist, and if you want our assistance in setting those up or whatever, or even going as far as presenting, that's fine, but we need some directive there.
So slide 25 is kind of what we put together for that, of what we think the next step as far as beginning that community engagement. And surveys was a tool, having facilitated conversations. Again, depends on how you want to do it. You want to do it as a whole board, you want to do it as your separate committees.
Okay. Does anybody have any feedback on that? I think the only comment I have about that is I know Colonel Geyer mentioned the need for design work and potential land. I don't know if doing the community engagement piece of it can go along at the same time as any design work or plans that need to be done. I don't know if there's an overlap there. I can't see hands very well. Y'all, so please feel free to go ahead.
So just off the top of my head, I think it might be better to have just one committee do this, and for a couple of reasons. One is we are a countywide school district. I also don't want to get into, I think otherwise we get, north versus the south. And I think we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. We want to, look at the district as a whole, because that's what we're doing. So I can see it better as a committee of the, or have a committee, an ad hoc committee that doesn't necessarily have to combine the two committees that we have, but make it into, one committee. I haven't thought about it until just this minute, but that's the first things that come to my mind. Because if you still separate it, you're giving, I think, the public too an impression of this section versus that section. Now we want to look at the whole thing together. Yeah. But maybe other people feel differently.
Colonel Geyer?
Yeah, I agree that a single committee is the way to do it. We got to get away from the north and south issues. But I also believe that we don't need community input to get started on new schools in the Bluffton, Okatee, Hardyville area, because they're not gonna say much about that or have anything to do really with that. We know that has to be done. And we know we have a place to put it on the May River campus. We don't really have any other options for land. So it seems to me that we could go get right on that. And we also have already got a commitment for the design work on Hilton Head High School, where the committee really is going to be needed, or community input is going to be needed in the right sizing part of this equation, because that is going to be the politically sensitive issue. Building new is not going to be politically sensitive. it's right sizing is going to be. And so, and, there's really no right sizing going possible with what we have in the Hardyville. We've exhausted our options to add anything in the existing schools in the Bluffton, Hardyville, OPT area. So I think it's separate issues. One is get the new building on the road, and secondly, figure out how we're going to right size and continue with what we didn't fund in the original community survey that was done. That we can't lose sight of that, because that was a lot of hard work. And I'm sure it's probably still very valid for what we need.
So can I ask, do we think that it's necessary for us to have a recommendation out of this joint committee that recommends those specific action items along with the community engagement so that we can get the ball moving on those specific things so that they're not lost in the shuffle?
Well, I have a question too. I'm
Excuse me, Mr. Smith, can you wait 1 minute, please?
Question-
Unless it's to answer or engage on the question that I have on the floor.
Yeah, it is actually. I think that doing that, I think that we're moving a tad bit just very fast. I think that we should, in terms of, I think that we should digest this and think about this overnight or over a period of time, and then go back to our prospective committees as a committee where we would want to move and how do we see best, and maybe have another joint meeting prior to the meeting, and then make a decision upon that. But I really feel that we're just where we're pushing it through right now. We're rushing it. So I'm very concerned about it. Right as of right now, I'm even having one committee like that's, there are more underlying questions in terms of even in facility spaces. Are we using facility spaces for just smaller class sizes? What is best in certain communities? So I really feel that we're moving too fast on this. That's my opinion. But yeah, I think that we should go back to our prospective committees and talk about and dissect and understand what we talked about today before making anything else.
And you certainly could vote down any recommendation. I mean, the committee or this joint committee's work is strictly limited to recommendations to the full board. So, you could vote it down today if it did become a recommendation. I was simply asking what the feedback was from the other members on whether or not we should make a recommendation to the full board to keep that moving. Because it seems like from slide 25, the community engagement is something that we need to do. The manner and how we do it, we haven't quite gotten to, but I want to make sure, like Colonel Geyer said, those items that we've known since 2019 were on the books and on the radar, that those do not get lost in the shuffle of this discussion.
And I do understand. However, the fact of the matter is that we are putting this on we were putting this in front of the boat and saying we're moving on this. There are still underlying things that could possibly come up, or things that need to be talked about that is just as serious as these. So it almost seems as though that we're rushing and we're saying that these projects are going to be done as soon as possible. All these projects are going to be done now, and then that's where we're moving forward with. Or like it's been predetermined. So I don't really see the urge or the need to move it forward if everyone is going to support all the projects, and there are other underlying projects out there too as well that are just as important that we're not discussing. And if you ask me, I'm still looking for the information of how building these buildings are academically driven, and that I don't see. That's what scares me the most about just building the buildings, and that's what I hear a lot of people talking about. We just building. In terms of academic, how is it supporting us? Not with just small class sizing. Small class sizing is real commercialized. That's broad. So when we get technical with it. Thank you.
Okay, Rachel, I definitely think we need to bring forward to the board a recommendation out of this committee, because the board voted for each of these other committees. The board voted to form the Bluffton Growth Committee and also the North of the Broad. So therefore, I move that the joint meeting today with the North of the Broad and the Bluffton Growth Ad Hoc Committees recommend to the full board that we transition from separate committees and make and combine them, or let's not use the word combine, that we transition from separate committees and make one committee to move forward with recommendations regarding referendum and
How about
the process, right?
planning?
Because
Future
what-
planning.
future planning, perfect.
Yeah, 'cause
Because then that committee can make well, I'll wait till the second and then I'll talk.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Earl. So that committee then can say, like what Colonel Geyer said, which I think is very accurate. We don't need community input, that we need 2 schools or whatever in Bluffton. We just need to get the ball rolling. So instead of getting into every little subsection that we've discussed today, let's just say, we want to dissolve these 2 ad hoc separate north-south committees and have one ad hoc committee, and people can do what we always do, is put in your name if you'd like to be on it, and then the chair can assign the committee and the board can accept it or reject it.
Can I read back the motion and try to get what he said?
Sure.
I move that the joint meeting today with the North of the Broad and the Bluffton Growth Ad Hoc Committee recommend to the full board to transition from separate committees to move forward as one committee regarding referendum and future planning.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
That's great. And I might just put committees, where you have committees, Robin, in the, right after ad hoc, make that plural, because it's the 2 committees. Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay.
Dr. Glatz, would you be agreeable to having it say future facilities planning?
Sure, that's perfect, even better, a little more, that's, yeah, because that's what we're doing.
Ms. Boatright?
I support this tremendously, but I have another pedantic question. It's going to be 6 people, right? So is there an issue with having a committee that composes a majority of the board? I mean, I know there's been some talk. I haven't paid a ton of attention. I didn't have time to research, but it almost seems like maybe we just put this back to the board if it's going to be the majority of board members on the committee. But hopefully someone knows more about it than I do.
You don't have the committee be a quorum
No.
of the board.
Right. It has to be less than 6. So whatever separate committee was formed, it would have to be less than 6.
So you can't just combine the 2 committees because you have 6. Okay, or you'd have 7 because doesn't Bluffton have 4?
Oh, I think do we have 4 now? I think. Yeah. Mr. Smith?
No, do we have 4? No.
Yes.
Stick went off and I.
Oh, yeah, that's
stopped.
3, so it's just a 3.
Yeah, right?
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Ms. Boatright, were you finished? I think so. Is Mr. Smith's hand down? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. So let's unless anybody has,
With one new committee or.
It's
I
fine.
don't have a
We
coalition.
know what we're doing. We're
No,
not
we-
combining the 2 and
No.
Right.
Robert has his hand up.
right. Mr. Otting?
One of the things we were thinking about, and Colonel Kyer kind of got into it about the purpose of this committee. If you kind of look at that eventually we'll form, if you want to form like a public committee in January, really this purpose of this committee is to go out to the public, get feedback in order to give instructions to that public committee on what they're tasked to do. Like right now, I don't think you could tell a committee what they're tasked to do as far as looking into, if you go the same route we did last time, we don't know exactly what you tell a group to do. And that's really what you're going out to the public. And I wanted to clear up because Mr. Smith was talking about project, no projects are decided other than y'all said we really need to look at what was in the 2019 referendum, which I agree, that definitely needs to be considered because we told the public that that would be a phase 2. But that's the way I looked at it. This committee that you're forming's purpose is to go out to the community, develop instructions for that next group that would build a referendum.
And to add on kind of what Colonel Guyer was saying, there's information out there, some of it's misinformation. So going to the public, you have an opportunity to clarify and clear up any misconceptions that people have. So it's sort of twofold, yes.
So the first thing this committee will do is develop its scope.
Yes, sir.
First thing they'll do.
Can I ask one more question? And again, it's a little less pedantic this time, but there was in the first round of the community-led whatever the 2019 committee was, when they broke it into two pieces, they said the second piece would not be considered until there was a community committee, similar to what that was formed in 2019 to look at, and they used the word right sizing. So would this community work with that? Are we going to form that community group, or does that community group form spontaneously? Because I do think we need to meet that very specifically laid out requirement.
Let this new committee decide.
If I could,
That's part of it.
if I could just say, there was never a directive out of that committee to do anything of that nature. There were discussions that were along that line. Now recognize when the Community Project Review Committee brought their recommendation forward, it was for all 629 million. They did not say that you needed to break it apart. That was a conversation of the board at the time and Dr. Berg, that it was too big. Did not think it was, but the committee did not say that. So just.
Well, the committee members, some that I've talked to would disagree, and it's in writing on the final presentation. When it talks about it, if you go, and it's not on the website right now, or I'd pull it up. I don't know where it went, but when you look at what the final presentation was to the board, it's in writing that we have and I understand that this committee would do similar. My concern would be if it's a board committee versus a committee that includes the community like in 2019.
So can I speak, Rachel?
Yes, ma'am, please.
So Ingrid, my answer or the way I would answer that would be the community committee is not representing, they have not been elected by the voters as each of the board members has. So they can say anything they want to, but they really have no power or authority. The board as a whole does have that power authority. So we'll take that into consideration, but we may decide that that's not in the best interest of the public to do what they've asked in that, but because they don't have any power or authority. That's their opinion, which is fine, and they've expressed it, and that's fine to express it.
I just think it goes to, there was a reason we did the community committee in the first place. And I would hate to lose the momentum from that community meeting, the whatever we call it, the CPROC or Community Planning and Resource Committee, I think is what it was called.
I think, well, isn't it, please correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but isn't the desire, at least what I'm gathering from this conversation, is that this new combined committee would be tasked with setting forward the scope that would be used by the community committee that's going to be formed for this 2023 potential referendum.
Well, that makes sense to me.
Okay, that was my understanding.
That's just our suggestion.
Yeah.
My hand raised too, in reference to that.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
No, being that it seems like the staff was given specific directions on what this committee was doing. Maybe we don't need a committee. Maybe the staff can just bring back another recommendation, because it seems like they have pretty much already know what they want, or Mr. Otten pretty much already know in terms of what they want. So maybe we can just let the staff bring back the recommendation, and we can either vote that up or vote that down, or make a motion or not make a motion, because it seems like they kind of already know what they want already. Because it seems like Mr. Otten was telling us exactly in terms of what this committee being formed exactly will be doing. So I mean, or if I can get some clarification around that, or maybe I misinterpreted that.
You need to vote.
Yeah, that's not the way I understood it. Ms. Boatright, your hand's still raised.
Did someone say something just now?
Sorry, I'm done. Hold on, put it down.
I'm trying to navigate the hands.
Someone said something. After what I said, someone responded to something.
Yeah, I think I said that that wasn't my understanding of the situation right now, or that I think staff is giving us their recommendations. I think we're having a discussion of going to the community and engaging them as stakeholders, and us as board members doing our jobs to represent our individual communities and the district as a whole. But that's
Right, but in terms of what exactly the committee was doing, it seemed like staff was saying that the community, that the committee should be just coming up with a community, community volunteers for a whole nother committee. And the scope of it, I thought that would be the board work to do, and to figure out if that even the route how we would want to go down that road time, if that was what we want to do. So that's what I'm referring to be Pacific.
Yeah, the committee, as with every committee, the scope would be determined by that committee and approved by the board.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Anybody else? No, I'll call for the vote on this motion. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Was that unanimous, Robin?
No,
No, it was Smith.
Mr. Smith hasn't voted.
Oh, Mr. Smith?
It's nay. It's a no for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you could give me the final count, Robin, that would be wonderful.
You're right there.
Here we go. Now I can see it. So it's 6 yes, 1 no, no abstentions, no absences. Okay. So in the report to the full board at our next meeting, I'll bring forward this motion and also give a brief report on what we discussed today. Mr. Smith, your hand is still raised? Is there any other comments or discussion around planning for future needs? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to the next item, which I believe was looking at another date. I don't think that's necessary now, given the motion. So if everybody's agreeable with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I move that we adjourn.
Second,
Agree. Aye.
thank you.